Howdy! This Bill Turner from Oklahoma has you dog. It's kind of cloudy today, so there's a little less glare on my glasses. I don't know if that matters to you. Again, I don't really like video. I just decided to start making videos because apparently everybody else in the world likes video more than I do, and so I figured, maybe a better way to get people's attention. It does, who knows how well it's working. It's really kind of a pity, it's interesting to me to notice how sort of sad it is about American culture these days that it's so much easier to get a lot of people's attention by being a conservative. Of course, these conservatives are not these like conservative. Nothing that's a bit conservative about them. There's nothing at all conservative about Rush Limbaugh or Sean Hannity or anybody at Phone News or um, Ann Coulter, you know, Andrew Sullivan, any of those idiots. There's nothing really very conservative about them at all, especially not in the traditions of what I would call Anglo-American conservatism, which used to be a respectable political philosophy. In fact, it was the political philosophy of respectability. If you're fine of saying Prince Charles is the modal conservative, right? Now he espouses some ideas like all of that environmentalism and architecture and all that kind of stuff, which we think of as being kind of liberal. But the point is that one of the many things that American conservatives completely miss is that one of the core concepts of conservatism in the Western tradition is what we call noblesse oblige, right? So if you're really, really, really going to be conservative, then you need to be concerned about the well-being of the people whom you consider to be your lessers. Now, I mean, obviously, conservatism is all about hierarchy, and conservatives say liberals are elites, which is gross nonsense. Actually, conservatism expressly espouses elitism. Sal Bellow, the famous novelist's son, what's his name? I can't remember his name, literally wrote a book called Nepotism, in which he argued basically that if you're related, if you're a descendant of somebody who's fairly famous and did something fairly prominent and considered most people considered important, kind of like this guy's, father was a famous novelist, then that means you must be better than anybody else anyway. And this is a very Trumpian concept. And this is one way in which Trump is kind of really genuinely conservative, but to say for so-called conservatives in the United States to say that liberals are the elitists, the only way in which that makes even a tiny little bit of sense at all is the proposition that somehow by choosing to take great pains to enact major legislation providing civil rights for African Americans, that somehow these wacky liberals who led the charge, Lyndon Johnson and the Democrats who supported him as opposed to the Democrats who opposed him, and of course the Republicans, there were a fair number of Republicans who had to vote for the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act as well because not all the Democrats were willing to vote for them. But those wacky liberals who voted for some measure of equality for African Americans are somehow taking something away from white people, which is gross nonsense. Civil rights is not a zero-sum game. Equality for African Americans is not taking anything away from white people, and there's nothing elitist about it at all. It's the most anti-elitist thing on the planet. But conservatives have managed to sell a lot of white people on the idea, the big bad federal government just takes money away from poor white people and gives it to lazy black people, which is gross nonsense. You saw this with the claims about, the Newt Gingrich was talking about how Barack Obama was the food stamp president when Barack Obama took office during the middle of a major recession. Food stamp should increase during recessions. That's kind of part of the deal. Or in 2012 when Rick Santorum, good Republican conservative, good Christian conservative, was running for president, he literally said out loud that he didn't want to make black people's lives better by giving other people's money, which is just gross, hideously racist, typical Republican garbage. And not at all what's going on. By necessity, given that African Americans are only about 14% of the population, it simply is the case that white people are numerically the majority beneficiaries of any federal program. It's necessarily the case. So this idea that federal government takes money away from poor put upon white people and gives us lazy black people, that's kind of the implicit message that Nixon developed with the silent majority shtick. And that's definitely what Ronald Reagan was playing when we talked about welfare queens, because everybody knows the modal image of a welfare queen in most people's minds is a black woman who's using food stamps to buy steak at the grocery store, which it's just a gross racist garbage. But anyway, but that's the kind of thing that a lot of people, oh boy, I want to eat that up, because it's stupid, it's intellectually simple, it feeds people's existing prejudices. And if you actually want to stop and think about anything that's not nearly as fun and exciting, so I guess hard to get people's attention for it. But anyway, but we have some interesting and some absolutely wildly, just absolutely hysterically funny news items to talk about today. But we also have some really, let's start out with the stuff that's really nothing at all. Not the tiniest little bit funny about it. It's really disgusting and tragic and horrible. So the first thing I want to talk about today is that really deeply kind of sad press conference by the poor guy in Georgia, the Georgia election official, who was explicitly he got up and said he was really angry and he should be angry, a lot to be angry about. I can't believe him listen a little bit. And talked about the fact that he and the Secretary of State are facing threats. The wife of the Secretary of State has been getting what he called sexualized threats through her cell phone by people who are threatening them because they're doing their jobs. And that's all they're doing. And by them doing their jobs, they are necessarily having to certify the fact that the people of the state of Georgia, by apparently for any narrow margin, doesn't matter how big the margin was, voted for Joe Biden instead of Donald Trump. So Joe Biden created the state of Georgia, basically. Donald Trump won a lot of votes in Georgia, but Joe Biden won more. And that was clearly, the outcome is as reliable as it can be. They did a hand recount, and the hand recount came back with very close to the initial total. So, there's no good reason to believe any fraud or anything out of the ordinary occurred in the Georgia election. It was a perfectly solid, open, free, and fair election. But because Donald Trump doesn't like the results, and Donald Trump is a petulant child who expects everybody to do what he wants them to do right away, Donald Trump is busy denouncing this poor governor. The governor and the Secretary of State of the state of Georgia is encouraging his idiot followers to attack these people and to threaten them. And these people, then they have security details, unusual levels of security details, because of the fact that they're just doing their jobs. And the other guy, the one thing that this gentleman in Georgia, in his press conference, he's a high level, he's an election official in the Secretary of State's office. He pointed to was the fact that apparently they've hired some extra help. It's an election, they need the help. They have a 20-year-old guy who's apparently just a contract employee. God only knows what his political preferences are. We don't know. It doesn't matter. Who has been getting his own. This 20-year-old man has been getting threats, and somebody put a noose out, promulgated a noose with his name on it to try to threaten him. While he's just doing, as this guy said in Georgia, he's just doing his job, and he doesn't have any control over what's going on. He's just moving data from one machine to another. And then, but by God, Trump supporters are going to go threaten him and try to promise to hang him just for doing his job. This is the level of the sheer stupidity and just gross nonsense that we're dealing with from Trump and his supporters. I think part of, in some ways, maybe the saddest. This is peak Trump. This is exactly what one would expect from Trump. People are like, gosh, why would he make, this is completely confusing and unpredictable. No, it's not. It's exactly what you expect Trump to do. Have you been paying attention to what Trump's been doing for 4 years now? It's exactly the kind of thing you expect Trump to do, is act like a petulant idiot because of the fact that he lost a state in the election. So, but what's really kind of sad, I think in some ways the saddest thing about all this is that this man is standing, this Georgia election official is standing up and saying, calling on Donald Trump to tell these people to stop. He's not going to tell them to stop. He's encouraging them. It's just puzzling to me in the extreme that this man thinks that Trump is somehow going to behave responsibly in all this. Trump is not going to be responsible. Trump is not going to be responsible. Trump is a childish, mentally ill idiot who sees no problem in this. Trump is encouraging them because he thinks he should, by God, he wants to win Georgia, and so he should do whatever he can do. It's justifiable for him to do whatever he wants to do to try to persuade state officials in Georgia to declare the election for him, even though the people of the state of Georgia clearly voted for Joe Biden. But Donald Trump, he literally cannot grasp the idea that he doesn't always get what he wants. He literally cannot understand the concept. He just doesn't. It's not in his head to be able to think of, well, gee, maybe there's a reasonable, there's a separately reasonable option out there that's independent from what I want, and that separately reasonable option should prevail. He can't think the thought. He's not going to suddenly stand up and become a responsible human being. Not going to happen. Give it up. Stop. And of course, the problem then, some of it's all Trump's fault, but it's also the Republican Party's fault, because the Republican Party is sort of like a group think of their, they have signed on to the Trump agenda wholeheartedly. They literally, the Republican Party did not adopt a specific platform at their annual at their presidential convention this summer, which is extraordinary. All political parties are supposed to do that. The Democrat Party, as always, one of the things they do is they argue over the platform at the convention. And the Trump camp did, in fact, intervene in the Republican Party platform in 2016 because they had some specific things they wanted to accomplish. They wanted to make policy towards Russia more, kinder, gentler. And so they participated in it. But in 2020, they just said, the Republican Party said, oh, let's do whatever Trump wants to do. Which is just insane, because Trump is insane. And so now, and this is just how Trump and his fellow conservatives, such as they are, going back to they're not really conservatives at all, how his fellow conservatives operate in the Republican Party now. And this has been building up since Newt Gingrich in the early 1990s. Newt Gingrich is one of the people who bears a lot of the blame for the stupidity that is Donald Trump, Richard Nixon, Newt Gingrich, and these people who directed the Republican Party to where it is now. And it's basically Trump's party now. Trump took it over, and people say, "Oh, Trump changed the Republican Party." Trump didn't change do diddly shit. The Republican Party was there for him to take over relatively easily. They governed quite happily for them for 2 years. They did, for 2 solid years, they had complete control over both houses of Congress and the presidency. And the only thing they could pass was a tax cut, and that's just ridiculous. I mean, it's just idiotic. But anyway, so that's Trump, and that's the Republican Party. Then to make matters worse, recent beneficiary of a Trump pardon, Mike Flynn, the guy who Obama fired. Now we already understood why Obama fired him, but now he's just you're going to go out there and got to make sure everybody understands it even more clearly now. Trump has endorsed an open call to Flynn has endorsed an open call to Trump to impose martial law and force a new election. Because of course, surely Trump would win if we had a new election. Of course, Trump really won. I mean, it's just all fraud and election malfeasance. And Flynn wants to have all paper ballots and all the voter ID and all this nonsense, all this Republican garbage. And boy, that will certainly ensure Trump wins. But so but Flynn is calling on Trump to impose martial law and hold a new election. Of course, there's absolutely no valid legal basis for Trump to do that. That's ridiculous. And Flynn is actually comparing Trump to Abraham Lincoln. That's interesting. Gee, let's stop and think about it. What exactly was it that happened early in Abraham Lincoln's first term in office? Because he won election in 1864. He didn't live very long for a second term. But so he really only served one term. But his first term, because he won the election to a second term. Abraham Lincoln's first term in office, what happened? Gee, a whole bunch of states seceded. Abraham Lincoln faced an open rebellion by a number of states. That does not apply now. It's never happened again since then. And it probably never will happen. Many other Texans were talking about, let's secede again. Go right ahead, idiots. Have that, cut yourself off from all federal funds. Enjoy. Bye. We don't care. Not at all relevant. So Lincoln's example is not at all relevant to anything. Trump doesn't have anything remotely resembling that kind of problem. So in Lincoln, the one bad thing people do sometimes say about Lincoln is the fact that he was a little too zealous about doing things like suspending the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus, which means he was allowing county sheriffs or local law enforcement or the military for that matter to hold people in custody without having the opportunity to go before a judge, which is ordinarily you just absolutely can't do that in the United States. What police are supposed to do is apprehend people and then take them before a judge, and that's 101. And of course, they didn't really have police in the same sense then that we do now, but they did have county sheriffs and they had various other sorts of law enforcement. And of course, as I say, they had lots of military running around because, of course, it was during a war, the Civil War, the deadliest war we've ever had in the United States citizens that the United States ever participated in. And there are soldiers all over the place, and so soldiers, and Lincoln famously just said, hey guys, this guy's an idiot, and you shut him up, take him down, put him in jail, throw him in jail, and leave him there, and don't let him go for a judge. Which ordinarily, the Constitution is very specific. They're only very specific crime. And arguably, Lincoln was justified given the observances of the Civil War doing that, but that's one of the things that people criticize him for, is that overly heavy-handed. Now it's during a war. And people still criticize Abraham Lincoln for doing that, and here's Michael Flynn saying, oh, well, Donald Trump, we're not at war. There's no war going on. There's certainly no Civil War going on. Despite the idiotic threats from various Trump supporters, oh my God, if Trump loses, we're going to start a Civil War. Shut up, you're idiots. You don't know what you're talking about. So anyway, so that's going on. Michael Flynn's out there making a complete fool out of himself. Okay. So again, this is Trump's fault, but it's the fault of the Republicans for allowing Trump to take over their party and being idiots about it. So anyway. But and now Mitch McConnell is out here saying that he supports another COVID relief bill, but it's much smaller than what the Democrats passed back several months ago that he's been ignoring studiously while he's busy stuffing through as many unqualified Trump and judicial appointees as he possibly can. But he says he might pass he might be willing to get a smaller stimulus passed through Congress. Now, at least one senator said that the most recent proposal has too much aid for state and local governments, and his party doesn't like that. They're the ones who must need the help. This is Republican logic. We don't actually want to help anybody actually needs help. We just need to, And then, of course, the new proposal does, in fact, have some modified version of McConnell's great desideratum of trying to provide some sort of liability shield for employers against employees who catch COVID while they're at work. Because we wouldn't want any put upon employers. Oh, poor babies. They have to like worry about their employees or anything like that. That Republicans don't like that. They always want to side with the employers, which anyway. So there's that. So and of course then this is also part of the larger scheme where as various observers have noted, as soon as the minute we get a Democratic president in office, all of a sudden Republicans try to pretend like they're fiscal conservatives again, which is gross nonsense. The Republican Party hasn't been at least a little bit fiscal conservative since forever. Even Dwight Eisenhower was perfectly happy with having, I mean, he didn't run budget deficits, but only because he didn't ask Congress to lower the highest marginal income tax rate as a hangover from World War II was above 90%. So on your last dollar of income, your highest dollar of income, during the Eisenhower administration, if you made enough money, you're paying 90% of it in income taxes. And so, but in Eisenhower apparently he wasn't very rich himself, so I guess he didn't have any problem with it. So he didn't ask Congress to lower it. But Congress probably would have lowered it if he'd asked him to, especially the Republican majorities. But it took John Kennedy coming into office, and he proposed it and get it passed. But then Johnson got a tax cut passed in 1964 that Kennedy come up with. But anyway. So, and the only president since World War II to even come close to proposing a balanced budget, and achieving a balanced budget, was the Democrat Bill Clinton. And then, of course, Democrat Bill Clinton's Republican successor, George W. Bush, immediately squandered. Literally the Treasury Department was retiring whole classes of Treasury bonds because they didn't need them anymore because they anticipated budget surpluses, for the indefinite future. And then here comes George W. Bush. Got to cut taxes. Cut taxes twice. Once during wartime, you don't cut taxes during wartime, not for serious. So anyway, but now Republicans go, we're got to worry about this deficit. You created the deficit. You're the ones who passed the stupid, irresponsible, unnecessary tax cut during the first 2 years of the Trump administration, which contributed mightily to the current deficits. And now, obviously, the Democrats are apparently not too worried about deficit spending with their proposal of spending $1 trillion on COVID relief, but that especially insofar as it goes to ordinary people, it would help increase economic growth. And the other thing that needs to happen is just need to raise taxes, but that's we'll have to see what happens with that. But anyway, so those are the really sad and funny parts of Republican bad governance, which is what we're stuck with right now, and we'll continue to be stuck with at least until January. See what happens in January. And of course, Republicans, all we get from Republicans is bad governance, but we do still have plenty of funny hilarity. Oh my God, some really funny stuff. The Republican rank and file is still calling for their fellow voters in Georgia to boycott the upcoming Senate runoff or to write in Trump's name on their ballots because the election machinery in Republican-controlled Georgia with the Republican governor and secretary of state is supposedly so terribly corrupt that they should not participate in the election. There's a video clip out now of Sidney Powell's other half, Lynn Wood, another lawyer who's working with Sidney Powell. That touches him right there. Oh, you must be a real bright soul. Telling a crowd in Georgia the Republican Senate candidates have not earned their votes if the candidates have not demanded that the governor call a special session of the legislature. Not clear what the special session of the legislature is supposed to do, but by God, they should tell the governor he should. And of course, the Senate candidates have nothing to do with the state government. They don't have any control. The governor can ignore them, but anyway. But they're by God supposed to be out there at this stupid rally and calling on the governor to order up a special session of the legislature. So it's not all clear exactly what the point of all that is, but anyway. So And Lynn says, by God, this is Georgia, you're not dumb. You're not dumb enough to vote on them damn Chinese election machines again. Where, Chinese? It's not clear what happened to Hugo Chavez, because remember, Sidney Powell is saying that, this goes back to old Sidney Powell, originally saying that, Hugo Chavez conspired with Dominion voting people to create voting machines that would ensure he always won elections, and then somehow Dominion then bribed officials in Georgia to adopt these machines, and they're still set up so that they can make sure that they get the outcome they want from the elections. Okay, and usually that's sure. And so anyway, but these are the things, we can't trust those election machines, so you shouldn't vote on those election machines. So he's telling people not to vote in the Senate runoff. Which, I mean, again, if Trump is too stupid to think about, Trump only cares about Trump. This is the sheer stupidity. I mean, this should have been obvious to any thinking person watching Donald Trump operate before he even thought about running for president. The man's a selfish idiot, narcissistic, solipsistic idiot. But the Republican Party, he's our racist, so we have to let him take over our party. And now, of course, he can't, even if there were a policy platform, which there isn't, and Trump cannot conceive of the idea that the party exists separately from him, and that it might have its own set of priorities, and they might want to try to pursue those priorities And in order to do that, he needs to have majorities in either, preferably both houses of Congress. That's not going to happen, but at least one house of Congress. And he contributes to that by saying, boy, you should go out and vote for the Senate candidates and the Republican Senate candidates and Senate runoff in Georgia. Trump can't think. That thought is not ever going to enter Trump's head. He can't think that. So now he's busy running down, he's busy disparaging the governor and Secretary of State and contributing to his nonsense that his followers should not vote in the Republican Senate runoff. It's really stupid. It's also incredibly funny because he may really end up, because I mean, so like the whole thing about about mail-in voting, everybody's like, well, why do those Democrats? Wait a minute, all these mail-in votes rang heavily for Democrats because the Democratic Party said yes, go vote mail-in, so it's trying to run the risk of getting COVID. And Republicans and Donald Trump was like, oh, mail-in voting is very unreliable. Don't do that. Don't do that. It's all fraud. And so, and these idiot followers listen to him. It just sends me a symbol. I am not the kind of person. I have never seen a single individual whom I decide I would ever be at least a little bit willing to follow blindly. I don't care if it's Jesus. I don't care if it's God. It's God, this alleged God guy who doesn't exist. I don't care who it is. I'm not going to follow anybody blindly. But if you were the sort of person who might think about following somebody blindly, why you would pick Donald Trump is beyond me. The man, I mean, you've got to be kidding me. You're going to do whatever Donald Trump tells you to do? You're an idiot. That's really sad. I feel sorry for you. But anyway, so Trump is busy, telling people don't, your governor and your secretary of state are corrupt, and well, you can't trust them, and they're Republicans, and party loyalty is the only thing that's kept Republicans going since Nixon. They march, they all form up, they all wear the same suits, they all wear the same, same little lapel pins, and they maintain a high level of message discipline. Ronald Reagan said the 11th commandment is thou shalt not criticize a fellow Republican. And they all vote together, and as a result, they can still, and of course everybody's like, well, to our democracy. We don't have a democracy. We live in a republic. If we lived in democracy, Donald Trump would never have gotten to be president to begin with. The Electoral College is part of what makes our government a republic, not a democracy. And our government, federal government, was designed, literally set up to protect minority rights, not to enable majority rule. The federal government is designed to protect minority rights, not to enable majority rule. Now, we got a lot closer to majority rule with the African American Civil Rights Movement because all of a sudden all these black people who couldn't vote before are suddenly able to vote, and that's a great thing. And if that's what you mean by democracy, I'm all for that, but that's not the basic structure of our government. So everybody's talking about our democracy. We don't have a democracy, we have a republic. That's why Donald Trump is president, is because of the fact that the founders put the Electoral College in there because they didn't want just people to go out and be able to vote for president directly. They believed, obviously it turns out quite erroneously, that the Electoral College would ensure that only the very best property-owning white men would become president of the United States. We had a couple of property-owning white men who were really lousy presidents, and we needed, and in the meantime, we had a black man who's a much better president than either the two property-owning white men on either side of him, and so the Electoral College is useless now. It's doing exactly the opposite of what it's supposed to be doing, so we should get rid of it, but that's a whole other rant, but anyway. So Trump is busy screwing up Georgia, which is hysterical. It's incredibly funny, but anyway. The other major source of grand hilarity is the super lawyers Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell try to reverse election results in specific states. They're having a really bad debate. It's not going very well, which of course it shouldn't go very well because there's no good reason to reverse the election results in those states. Republicans in the Arizona legislature held a faux hearing in a hotel after the end of the legislative session to fulminate about Biden's having won in their state, which apparently the Native American vote was critical in that state, so that's good. Go Native Americans, those poor people. They, fighting back against the Christian invasion of the territory they lived on for thousands of years before the Christians showed up. And Rudy is still telling the Republican legislators in Pennsylvania that they can and should appoint that state's electors for Trump in defiance of the voters of the state. So the people in Pennsylvania voted pretty solidly for Biden, but Rudy's saying, boy, the legislature should intercede. And the Constitution does, in fact, give state legislators pretty much carte blanche to decide how they're going to appoint their electors. But the problem with that is they did that already. They set the rules, and it's really, really not acceptable for you to create a set of rules, and then if you get an outcome you don't like, to change the rule. That's the way small children do things. When you play with sometimes small children are like, oh, I'm losing, I'm going to change the rules. No, that's not how we do these things. And it's not obvious. It's not an obvious link, but I would argue that it's an ex post facto law. The Constitution does prohibit ex post facto laws, and an ex post facto law is something that has an impact. That has the impact of changing, making something that's already happened illegal after it's happened, and not illegal in this case, but changing the outcome after the fact. Which that's not the way you do it. It's just ridiculous. But that's what Rudy's telling people in Pennsylvania they should do. In Wisconsin. The Trump campaign. This is one of the best ones. The Trump campaign paid for a recount in the two counties that make up that contain the majority of the black population in the otherwise very white state of Wisconsin, Milwaukee and Dane County. Milwaukee obviously being where Milwaukee, the city of Milwaukee is, and Dane County being where the city of Madison is, Madison being the state capital. And those two places contain the majority of the black population in Wisconsin. And he chose those two counties as the counties that he wanted to recount. Just those two counties, only recount those two counties. Well, they recounted them, despite some interference from any Trump supporters. And whoops, and Joe Biden's lead actually increased by a few hundred votes in Wisconsin. So the Trump campaign paid for a recount and got exactly the opposite of the result they wanted. Oh, I hate it when that's so funny. And then a conservative group has filed a suit in the state Supreme Court to try to reverse the results. But the governor, Tony Evers, the Democratic governor of Wisconsin, has already certified the results of the election. And so it's not at all clear that, whether the state Supreme Court really has the power to reverse the governor's certification of the election. They may think they do, but it'll be an interesting fight to see what happens with that. So anyway, that's lurking out there. But then the Sidney Powell, remember Sidney Powell, the lawyer's too crazy for Donald Trump? What's that saying for too crazy for Donald Trump? And she's crazy. She's really seriously crazy. She filed a separate suit. There are two suits right now going on in Wisconsin. The one by the conservative, some sort of nebulous conservative group in the state Supreme Court, and then Sidney Powell has filed a suit in federal court. And whoops, she found she listed as one of her plaintiffs in that case a candidate in Wisconsin who lost his race and is one of the plaintiffs. And he found out. He said he issued a statement saying that he only found out through social media that he was one of the plaintiffs in the case because he hadn't agreed to be a plaintiff. Which is a big hairy boo boo. You don't list plaintiffs who haven't agreed to serve plaintiffs. And then, so they asked for temporary restraining orders, which is really hard to do because temporary restraining orders are extraordinary. The judges they didn't like to do that thing because part of the thing about temporary restraining orders is theoretically possible to get a temporary restraining order without notifying the other party. Because, sometimes you get temporary restraining orders and you're a screaming emergency, a tree's about to fall down in your damn house and you got to get a judge to order the tree to stand up again before, or, somebody's doing something that's going to cause you serious harm today, like right now, and the judge needs to order them to stop doing that, which means you got to get notice from the judge that they've been enjoined to stop doing what they're doing. But you can still usually get, sometimes if you enjoy a big enough emergency, you can get a judge to say, yeah, no, you people need to stop doing this right now, and I'm not even going to listen to you what you have to say. Well, so Sidney Powell sort of said she was trying to apply for one of those. But in order to do that, so there's this thing in the world called the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure. Now, obviously, it's a court system and it's supposed to be orderly, and so there are rules. There are both the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure that apply to all federal lawsuits, and then the local courts have their own more specific rules that you also have to follow. So the judge issued, not really an opinion, but it was a sort of notation. I don't know, a minute order, whatever. It'd be interesting to see how it's listed on the docket, but anyway. Issued a sort of statement about the fact that Sidney Powell filed a complaint. A complaint is what you use to start a lawsuit with. This is what you're saying. Well, here's what those meanies over there did to me, and here's why you should tell them to stop doing it. And that's how you start a lawsuit in any court, but especially in federal court. And then it had some obvious errors in it, and so she went back and filed a revised one. It turns out apparently the first one she filed was a draft that she didn't mean to file. Whoops. Hate it. I know I'm going to federal court without bothering to make sure that I got the right document first. But anyway, and so the first document did not comply with the basic rules. So the federal rules of civil procedure say if you're going to apply for temporary restraining order, you have to do like three things. There's three very specific things. And the first document that Sidney Powell filed didn't do any of those things. And then the revised one kind of sort of halfway did some of them, but didn't really do all of them. And then there's a question of whether or not she said she was going to give notice to the other side. And so and the judge is like, well, okay, if you're going to give notice to the other side, then according, since you haven't really met the criteria for a temporary restraining order, then I have to follow the local court rules. And that means the other side's going to have 3 weeks to respond to your complaint. And 3 weeks from now is going to be after the electoral college has already put Joe Biden in the presidency. And it is theoretically, I don't know the exact law on this because it's never happened before. But it might be theoretically possible for a federal judge to enjoin and reverse the decision of the electoral college. Obviously everything has to comply by the Constitution. You probably have to be able to show the specific mistakes, specific to what the electoral college did. because presumably the Wisconsin Electoral College votes to change the outcome of the election. That even if you were to just arbitrarily say, okay, Donald Trump gets Wisconsin electoral votes, it's still not going to be enough to give Donald Trump a majority in the electoral college. So it's not relevant. That's it. But in order to get a federal judge to try to muck about with the actions of the electoral college, you'd have to have some just completely overwhelming, like some gobsmacking, like bam, hit you right in the face, evidence for why you need to be able to get them to do that. And Sidney Powell ain't coming close. She's just going with these serious evidence for anything. The most amusing sort of big mistake in her most recent, other than the fact that she enlisted a plaintiff who didn't want to be a plaintiff, is the fact that part of what she did was she demanded, as evidence for her suit, all the security footage from cameras in a place called the TCF Center, which is in Detroit. And in case I assume you don't say something about intelligence or anything, maybe there's somebody out there who doesn't know much about U.S. geography. Detroit is not in Wisconsin. Detroit is in Michigan. And so she's asking for security footage from a different state to support her lawsuit, from security footage from Michigan to support her lawsuit in Wisconsin. I mean, it's just the levels of just this is just. I mean, it's screamingly funny. The levels of stupidity and craziness are just truly amazing. So anyway, but that's about all the hilarity I have for today. I mean, I hope you can go and find some of your hilarity around. There's certainly plenty of it floating around out there. Lots of incredibly funny, silly things going on out there. So, but anyway, and I don't know what we're gonna do when Biden finally takes office. Life may get really boring. We may not have anything funny and screaming funny to talk about anymore. But oh well. As people keep saying, we'll get more sleep. I mean, I sleep fine, but other people seem to get unable to sleep with Donald Trump's president. Sorry to hear that. Anyway, so all right, that's all for today. Bye bye, bonds. Thank you.